This is Paula from Plantland, and this morning we're going to talk about everyone's nemesis in the garden, deer. Those four-footed marauders that will come in and eat everything from your tiny seedlings to great big trees. Lots of deer here in the valley, and we try lots of different methods to repel them. This is all on the table here, are all the commercial products that we sell that are deer repellents. All of these are scent-based, which means that they stink, quite frankly, with the exception of one that I'll talk about in a second. All of these are made from formulas like rotten eggs, putrid meat oils. They're really disgusting. So a lot of these products, for the most part, you're not going to want to use someplace like on a patio or your deck, someplace where you're going to be trying to sit out there and enjoy the outdoors, enjoy your flowers. You're not going to want this stinky stuff nearby. We also tend not to use these on our vegetable gardens once the gardens actually start to produce fruit. And the reason is the same. They're just too stinky. And although you probably could wash off some of that scent, if you got just the faintest whiff of it while you were trying to eat your green beans, you probably would be put off eating the green beans. Now there is one new product here, this deer repellent spice scent, which is a newer variety that's supposed to have a much more pleasant scent. We used it on sunflowers in Plantland's border, and believe it or not, right here in town, right in Evergreen, we have deer that if Plantland wasn't fenced, they would come right on in. Last year we used this on sunflowers, and it lasted pretty well, and the deer avoided them. And it didn't stink up the parking lot as bad as some of these other products did. These are different things that you can use. These three over here, blood meal is a granular product. It's a meat processing byproduct. It smells really bad. It's not quite as awful as some of these other sprays because it doesn't have the rotten egg component. Blood meal is high in nitrogen, so you would want to be careful what you were putting it around. But it is something that you could try using in parts of your garden where there's lettuce or something like that. This is a little packet thing that you tie onto trees and shrubs. It does degrade fairly fast in the sunlight and the rain, so it's going to last for a season, but it's not something you're going to be able to leave out all the time. This is another granular application. Some people prefer these to the sprays, the granular type stuff. My personal experience with sprays is one time I went out and sprayed deer repellent liquid fence while I was wearing a good pair of shoes, and I've never been able to wear those shoes again because the stink got on them. So the sprays are something you want to be a little more careful with. They're all scent-based. Important to remember that. Important to remember that you have to keep reapplying them over the course of the summer. Now there are a couple other things besides fencing that you can do to protect some things. Mechanical methods is what we call them. This, and I'm going to have Michelle really zoom in on that, is a piece of a cherry tree I pruned off this spring. And if you look, you can see that there's baling wire kind of loosely corkscrewed around the wood. And what this method is that the deer, when they chomp down on this and they get wire in their teeth, they don't like that. That repels them. This is a very good method to use if you have just a small tree that you're trying to plant in the front yard. You don't want to fence it. You're not going to fence your yard. You can put this wire on the branches until the tree gets bigger. Now you do have to be attentive to this. You don't want this wire to ever get tight enough that it damages the branch. It should be a pretty loose corkscrew. Sometimes the best way to do that is to take another piece of branch or a piece of dowel and lay it along the branch that you're trying to put the wire around and wind the wire around both of them together, and then pull that dowel out so you get that nice loose wiring on that. This is actually a pretty effective method for protecting something like a single small tree that you're just trying to protect in the front yard. But I repeat and I caution that you have to be very careful about not letting this wire get so tight that it causes damage to the branches. That could be a very serious problem. The other mechanical method is what we call the cattle guard method. This is just a piece of wire fencing that I had at the house. Any kind of wire fencing with up to about 2-inch or so squares works for this. If you take this wire fencing and put it on the ground in front of, for example, a bed of tulips that you just want to protect this time of year. You spent money, you planted tulips, you want to enjoy them, but the deer have always come in and hammered them. If you put fencing on the ground around it about 2 to 3 feet out, all the way around that bed, the deer, when they step on this fencing, are again kind of scared by that. It's the cattle guard idea that their hooves catch in this and they don't like that. It can be pretty effective as a temporary measure in spring to protect something that you just need to protect for a few weeks or a month or so. I usually take this, and I used to have a big bed of tulips down our driveway that I protected like this. And I would take landscape staples, which are the U-shaped heavier pieces of wire, and put it in the ground. That's actually a pretty effective method. And then the last thing to talk about is fencing. Fencing, we almost always say, has to be at least 6 feet tall for deer to not be able to simply jump over it. And they can actually jump 6 feet if there's any kind of slight incline or something like that where they can kind of get going and get started. Around our property, we have about a 4-foot fence, but on the outside of our fence, in a lot of areas, we let a lot of the native stuff, holodiscus and snowberry, come right up to the fence. And what that has done is created a kind of barrier where the deer aren't going to jump that little 4-foot fence because they can't see to get over it. So they tend to jump the gate occasionally, but they don't jump the actual fence. But usually for a garden, we're talking 6-foot fencing, if not 8-foot fencing. The most successful garden enclosures almost are like you've made a room out of screen, so that you're making an 8-foot enclosure. And sometimes people cover the top too, so that they deter birds. So fencing is the ultimate protection against deer. It's something where you have to be very conscientious about never leaving the gate open and have to be very careful about all those sorts of things. The very last thing that I like to say about deer is it's important to never let them get comfortable on your property. If you're a serious gardener, you should never look out the window and say, oh, look how cute, it's a doe with a fawn. You should be running out the door like a mad woman, yelling at the deer, so they never feel like it's a comfortable place to settle in. I think our neighbors think I'm a little crazy, but I think they also know I have a lot of stuff in my yard I just don't want the deer to eat. One last thing that I just remembered before I finish, sometimes in winter, all bets are off with the deer. I have yews that I actually cover with burlap, and if you have plants that are particularly valuable or plants that the deer are getting to every year, come in and stop in and see us in the fall here in Plantland, and we can talk to you about covering certain shrubs with burlap. Never plastic, always something like burlap that breathes. So this is Paula from Plantland. I hope you're out there gardening, and I hope the deer aren't getting the best of you. Happy gardening.